Our Secretary of War reported that the American troops in the Philippines had conducted the war, as he put it, with scrupulous regard for the rules of civilized warfare. But there was much evidence to the contrary. For example, a report from the U.S. Army near Manila on February 5th of 1899 reads, "In the path of the Washington Regiment and Battery D of the 6th Artillery, there were 1,008 dead niggers and a great many more wounded. We burned all our houses. I don't know how many men, women, and children the Tennessee boys did kill, but they would not take any prisoners." General Jacob Smith once issued an order that all males above the age of 10 years old on the island of Samoa be executed. Fortunately, the order was not carried out. The American troops found themselves frustrated in this Philippine insurrection, frustrated in much the same way that American troops later found themselves frustrated in Indochina, fighting a war against an entire population, a war that was not fought by standard rules, conventional procedures, a war fought by the enemy in a guerrilla style of raid and counter-raid. And this frustration often led the American troops to mistrust everyone who was a Filipino. The American reporters who covered the war found, for example, that it was not uncommon for American troops to use torture techniques to get testimony from prisoners. And in 1902, the New York Evening Post ran a report of what was called the water cure, which was a style of torture used by the American troops. The report said, "The Filipino is placed on the ground with his arms and legs pinned down. His head is partially raised so as to make the pouring into the water an easier matter. If the prisoner tries to keep his mouth shut, his nose is pinched to force him to get air, or a bamboo stick is put into his mouth. In this way, water is steadily poured in, as much as 4 or 5 gallons, until the body becomes a frightful object to contemplate. The victim then cannot talk, so the water has to be squeezed out. Sometimes, to use the words of one soldier, we jump on them to get it out quickly. 1 or 2 such water cure treatments, and the prisoner either drowned or died, or confessed to whatever the troops wanted him to talk about." The Nation went about realized about this, saying, "We made war on Spain 4 years ago for doing the very things of which we are now ourselves guilty." By 1902, Elihu Root had become the Secretary of War of the United States, and Root began an examination into the stories of American misconduct in the Philippines. And a number of American soldiers were subsequently court-martialed for their behavior in the Philippines. In one trial, 2 American officers were tried for, quote, "willfully and cruelly causing 6 Filipinos to be hung by the neck for a period of 10 seconds, causing them to suffer great bodily pain." The court-martial changed the charge from causing them to suffer great bodily pain to causing them to suffer great mental anguish. And they were found guilty, and a letter of reprimand was placed in their file. Hanging somebody for 10 seconds was a common practice in this conflict, because it was to strike terror in the minds and hearts of the people of the Philippines, to get them to submit to the American interrogations. Many people, though, in the United States saw nothing wrong with this kind of conduct. In fact, many thought that it was absolutely necessary to subject the Filipino people to this military rule in order to make them a better people in the long run. In fact, some of the American newspapers boldly and openly called for even greater measures against the Philippine